And we are delighted to welcome back to the Asia Society Summit our great friend, Ken Wilcox. Ken was our host for the summit 1 year ago when we gathered out in Silicon Valley, where he serves as the chair of the Asia Society Northern California Center. He has a long and impactful history in the Bay Area, having served as chief of Silicon Valley Bank. He also has extensive experience in Asia. It was Ken Wilcox who established Silicon Valley Bank's presence in China. He's a global trustee of the Asia Society and a trustee of the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, and he's also chairman emeritus of Silicon Valley Bank. Ken, thanks so much for being with us and with the Asia 21 family again. Joining him for the conversation is Ejaj Ahmad, Asia 21 class of 2012, founder and president of Bangladesh Youth Leadership Center, BYLC. BYLC, the country's first leadership institute, is disrupting the higher education landscape in Bangladesh, tackling youth unemployment, connecting youth to jobs through physical and online networks, and utilizing in them values of public service and community engagement. This is a note to our attendees. Ken has graciously offered to give away a limited number of the Kindle version of his new book, Leading Through Culture: How Real Leaders Create Cultures That Motivates People to Achieve Great Things. The link to the order form will be sent in the chat box, and submissions will be received on a first-come, first basis. Ejaj, take it away. But before that, let me just show them the book. This is the book. Thank you. Over to you, Ejaj.
Thank you, Sanjeev. Good evening. Good evening, Ken. Delighted to have you with us. Thank you for making time for us. And good morning to our friends in Asia and wherever you're joining from. We are delighted to have this conversation on leadership with Ken Wilcox, who is a practitioner of leadership and has written a phenomenal book on this subject, which is very hands-on, full of nuggets of wisdom from his years of experience in Silicon Valley Bank. I would like to begin our conversation by inviting you, Ken, to tell us a bit about the central message of your book and what inspired you to write a book on leadership, focusing on culture.
Oh, thank you very much. First of all, it's a delight to be here. I really appreciate the opportunity. Secondly, I would like to thank you, Ejaj, for grossly exaggerating. It's not really, well, as my publisher told me, he said it's a good book, Ken. It's not a great book, but it's a good book. So I do think it's a good book. It's very practical, highly untheoretical. I'd like to start by just acknowledging that the topic in the book, the topic of leadership, is one that has always been of interest to me, actually going all the way back to childhood. And what I mean by that is that my dad taught at General Motors Institute, which is the only automotive engineering school in the world, but he didn't teach engineering. He taught writing and public speaking. And I can remember when other kids were out in the backyard playing catch with their fathers, I was seated at the kitchen table listening to my father correct my essays, or I was standing in the living room listening to my father coach my public speaking. At the time, I wasn't terribly appreciative. I wished at the time that I'd had another dad, but in retrospect, I now am ever so happy that he was my dad. And he certainly piqued my interest in a lot of subjects that have been meaningful to me ever since. We would sit around the dining room table at night, and my father would lecture the family on what he was teaching in university in the area of organizational behavior, and in particular, leadership. Ironically, when I became CEO of Silicon Valley Bank in about 2001, I was delighted for about 10 seconds. And then after I got over being delighted, I was scared to death. I was scared to death because I really had wanted to be CEO, but I had no idea how to be a CEO. I'd never been one before. And it suddenly occurred to me that I really don't know what I'm doing. And worse yet, I became CEO of Silicon Valley Bank at the beginning of the dot-com recession. That was first quarter of 2001. Everything began to implode. And we actually went for several quarters with the numbers every time being worse than they'd been in the quarter prior to that. I remember one of the board members, who was a personal friend of mine, called me up the day it was announced and said, he wanted to congratulate me. He thought I was the least likely person to be chosen for the job. And then he laughed. And I thought, what a weird joke. In any case, I started thinking rapidly about how to go about doing this job. So I started reading. I got a coach. I started talking to other CEOs. And then I did something that I think was really important. And that is, at night, I would write down the things that had happened in the course of the day and how we had addressed them and whether or not I thought that we were headed in a good direction. And over time, I got so into the habit of spending 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes at night writing things down that by the time I retired, I had literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of notes. So when my wife and I came back from our years in Asia, setting up the bank in China, I pulled out those notes and started reading them and decided, this would be a decent book, I think. Maybe not a great book, but certainly a good book. And so I put into it everything I thought I'd learned in the course of 15 years anyway, leading the bank. I believe that almost everybody in an organization like Asia 21 will be in a leadership position someday, even if they're not now. And I know that most of you already are in positions of leadership. In fact, many, many people find themselves in the course of their lifetime in a position of leadership. Sometimes it's a big leadership position, like a CEO of a company. Sometimes it's more of a division manager. Sometimes it's a team leader. Sometimes it's a leadership position in another kind of an organization, like a school or maybe a church or something else. But so many people are called upon to lead. And I'm hoping that this book, being a very practical book, will provide people with some thoughts that might inspire them and help them along the way. There is a huge need for leadership in today's world, more, I think, than ever before, for a number of reasons. First of all, the world is so small today, we can no longer just ignore each other. It wasn't that long ago we could just leave other people on their own continent if we wished, and we didn't really have to bump into each other. Today, that's an impossibility. Also, the world has become so complicated that very few people, including myself, are capable of understanding it. And there's lots of conflict today. And to state the obvious, we're in an era in which there's not just conflict between peoples, there's conflict between ideologies that ultimately affect all of us everywhere, Asia and the West alike. And in all aspects of life, there are immediate problems. There's the COVID, the global warming, the polarization of wealth, the rise of Asia, the challenge of the United States working with China, the future of capitalism, the future of the governance systems that different countries employ, and how they will evolve. And from an American point of view, the very future of democracy is in question today. So my book doesn't deal with those gigantic problems. It deals with more everyday kinds of problems.
So I think that was a great sort of introduction to the central ideas in the book. So thank you, Ken, for providing that. You also mentioned that this book is not addressing some of the larger problems in the world. It's more tactical or strategic, that what can you do to make progress. Something that resonated with me with what you said is the world is becoming small. So we are living in this global sort of environment where cross-cultural communication is critical for progress, right? So I cannot just do business inside my country to solve problems like COVID-19 or climate. We have had conversations on climate as part of the Asia 21 summit in the last day. My question to you is, from your experience of working in China, why do you think cross-cultural communication is so difficult? What makes it so difficult? What are some of the common conflicts, and how do you make progress on it? What's your advice for Asia 21 alumni and young leaders who are working across boundaries to solve common challenges? What's your advice for us when it comes to cross-cultural communication?
Yeah. So let me run through quickly the major obstacles. The first one, and this may seem obvious, but the first one is that we're all human. And there is a natural human tendency when we find out that somebody that we're working with has a fundamentally different outlook on life. The natural human tendency when we find out that somebody close to us has a different view altogether is to assume that they must either be stupid or evil.
Yep.
It's very difficult to say somebody else has a different view from mine and it must make sense. And yet that's the approach that we need to take if we expect things to work. We need to start with the assumption that from within the framework of that person's world, their view is a sensible one. And my job is to understand the context in which they're operating and the belief system within which they're thinking about it before I condemn. That's the fundamental problem. But then underlying that is the fact that we're all in such radically different situations. We grow up in different belief systems. We grow up with totally different histories. If you read a Chinese history book covering the last 70 years and you read its American counterpart, you would believe that we lived in two different universes. The history as we see it is so radically different. And of course, our cultures are so different. And our personal experiences are so different, even our ages. The fact that I'm the age I am and the person I'm talking to may be in a different age bracket altogether has a gigantic impact, especially in this world where everything changes so rapidly. You know, when I was a kid, the world wasn't that much different from my father's world, and in turn from his father's world. Today, the world in which my sons operate, and they're in their 30s, is so different than the one that I grew up in. All of these are barriers to understanding. And then finally, I would say we have different aspirations. One Chinese phrase that I found very useful and that helps to explain why so many joint ventures in China fail, and in fact, over time, they almost all fail, is this phrase, one bed, two dreams. And I think that is very real. It is very real. We may be in the same bed together, but we definitely are pursuing two different dreams.
What's your advice to young leaders how do you reconcile these conflicting values? Because people have different aspirations, but when it comes to global issues like the climate, there has to be a consensus. It's one planet. How do you bring people together, and how do you articulate that vision as a leader?
I think, well, the biggest key is never, ever throwing in the towel, never falling back into the, well, he's stupid, or, well, he's evil. Yeah. Always assuming innocence to the extent that the reality that we perceive will permit us to assume innocence. Always presuming innocence and engaging. The second fallback for people, besides not presuming innocence, the second big one is simply escapism. It's, I can't deal with that person, so I won't. So it's, one, assuming innocence, two, continuing to engage, and three is constantly learning about the other person and about the other side and the other viewpoint. And I think that people should approach this almost scientifically, that they should develop a theory of what the other people are thinking about. And as they see new evidence, add to the theory and constantly seek to understand where the other side is coming from. It's the only hope, but it's like Sisyphus pushing the rock up the mountain. Challenge never goes away.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I'm taking away from your message is it's critical for us to engage, especially with people who think differently than us. I think our common default response is, you're different, so I'm not going to listen. You cannot tune out. Engage with people who think differently, who have different values and ideologies than us. And then while we engage, also to have that empathy, that curiosity to understand where they're coming from and to look at the values that unite us. Because I can always find values or beliefs that are different, but what is common? To focus on the common values may help us to shape the common aspiration or the common dream, which I think is critical for the world today. Because many of our challenges are global in nature, and there is no alternative to working across boundaries and communicating with people who don't think like us. So I think so. Thank you. That was very very useful. I wanted to move on to another topic you address in your book, and I wanted you to expand on it. In your book, you write about that the job of leadership also involves setting the tone. What do you mean by setting the tone, and why is it important for someone exercising leadership to set the tone?
It's very important because people in positions of leadership are being copied almost automatically. Meaning, if you think about any company or any group or organization that you've been part of, and then think about the influence of the leader, people copy leaders whether they intend to or not. At a very simple level, you see that in families, meaning in every family that has children, the children are copying the parents, at least until they're 10 or 11 or 12. And then they start going in a totally different direction. Often they're inverse copying. They're doing exactly the opposite of what their parents do for a while. But for the first 10, 12 years, people copy their parents. And in companies and in organizations, people, the followers, the employees, the people that are looking at the leader are subconsciously following what the leader does. One of the things I mentioned in my book was then in one of the companies I worked in, we had a CEO who swore constantly. Every single sentence had some swearing in it. And everybody in that corporation swore regularly, everybody. Nobody was left out, even I. And then that person left and we got a new CEO, and overnight the swearing disappeared. The new CEO never swore, and we never heard anybody else swear again. It's people just subconsciously copy leaders. So setting the tone is a large question of behavior. The way you behave will have a profound effect on the way the people in the organization behave. But in addition to that, I think leaders try very hard to set the tone consciously and not just de facto by virtue of being alive. So I think that they ask themselves how they would like people in that corporation or that organization to behave. And then they try very, very hard to behave the way they want other people to behave. And that's one of the aspects of being a CEO or a leader is so difficult because you can't turn it off. You can't just say, okay, today I'm going to misbehave all day and not worry about it, because people will follow that. They will follow that. I'll tell you one quick example. I got on the board of a significant organization about 20 years ago. And at the time I had a really bad habit. I was always looking at my cell phone, every 10, 15 seconds, I'd look at my cell phone, check for the email. And when I got on that board, because it was such an important board, I said to myself, I've got to improve. I can't behave that way anymore. I'll have a terrible reputation and it's disruptive to others. So I won't look at it. And for the first meeting, I almost had to sit on my hands, but I didn't look at my cell phone. And then in the second meeting, I noticed that the chairman of the board was looking at her cell phone. And almost immediately, I said to myself, well, if she can do it, I can do it. And I just fell right back into my old habits all over again. Funnily enough, about 10 years later, when I left that board, I found out she wasn't actually looking at her email. She was playing computer games. But same thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great insight. So what I'm taking away from your remark is it's critical to set the tone, but also pay attention to your behavior because people are observing you 24/7. Okay?
24/7, yes.
People are observing you. And I think sometimes when it's even unintentional, people make interpretations of your behavior. So you have to pay attention to how you behave and set the right kind of example, understanding that people copy leaders and people aspire to be like you. If you exhibit positive behavior, people copy that. If you exhibit negative behavior, people also copy that. Therefore, leaders have a responsibility in practicing the right kind of values in the workplace, in all aspects of life, I guess, which is challenging, but that is the reality of leadership.
There's another thing too. Two other things. One is it's pretty obvious, I guess, and that is praise people for good behavior, because people gravitate toward praise, behavior that warrants praise. But the other thing, which isn't so obvious, I'm amazed at the number of companies that have values, but when it comes time to give out bonuses, they'll give the bonus solely based on numerical performance and ignore the values. So for quite a while at Silicon Valley Bank, we had a bonus system where 50% of the bonus was based on performance in a numerical sense, and the other 50% of the bonus was based on behavior, to the extent to which people behaved as we expected them to. And that makes a huge difference. That's putting your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. That's a wonderful insight. Ken, actually at the Bangladesh Youth Leadership Center, we have 6 values and we give out awards every year for our colleagues, team members who practice those values. And our team members get to vote on values such as empathy, on values such as grit, on values such as integrity. Of course, as a nonprofit, we can't dish out big bonuses like a private sector organization, but we try to recognize and appreciate good behavior and reward that. And that has been quite encouraging for us in terms of keeping our team members engaged and connected to the mission of the
I want to just add something to what you just said, because I think you said something that has a really profound aspect to it. And that is, a lot of times in organizations, the leadership feels they have to create the values and push them down. Yeah. The truth is, you could have your employees vote on the values and they would come out to be pretty much identical to the ones you want to push down, because people have an immense capacity for good, at least in public. And And we actually, at one point at Silicon Valley Bank, took the top, whatever it was, 50 or 100 employees, and we put them together for a day and asked them to create the values. And I was utterly amazed. They created exactly the values we would have wanted them to create. Because that just is the way it works.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Ken, I just wanted to quickly give a shout out to our friends in the audience. We have some questions coming in. Almir, Rupam, Tenzin, Arnel, wonderful to see you. Thank you for engaging with us. Vinita, Mark, Arnel has a question. There are a lot of comments. Munira, good to see you. Ahmed Javed, great to see you. Arnel's question is, how can we avoid having populist leaders who curse and behave badly, as if that is a cool thing to do, but creating so much damage to a society? I think Arnel is drawing on examples perhaps from our continent. Arnel and I belong to the same continent, but can we see that playing out in Western countries as well? So maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah.
That how can we avoid having populist leaders setting wrong examples? And what is your, there is a second part to his question. What is your take on good guys finish last?
Well,
before you start, I just want to ask our friends who are with us in this session, please keep on sending your questions and comments, and I will try to cover as many as I can in the next 30 minutes. Thank you. Over to you, Ken.
I hate to beg off, but the first question is more difficult than I'm capable of, but I'll speculate. I think that we have this problem around the world right now to one degree or another. Of course, some systems are such that the idea of a populist leader is almost out of the question, but many other governments are currently structured in a way that it's possible for a populist leader to rise, and we can see where that's getting us. It's a problem, and it's not just limited to one country or one continent by any stretch of the imagination. I personally believe that the answer to that is a fine interplay between leaders and cultures, meaning I do believe that we need to find some really good leaders who will pull us up and set the tone. Mm-hmm. But once that tone is set, it has a profound influence on the culture. And the better and stronger the culture is, the more likely the culture is to produce better leaders, higher quality leaders. And when I say higher quality leaders, I'm not talking about necessarily expertise. I'm talking about the kinds of people they are. Yeah. Because the best leaders are people who are not concerned about their own personal well-being, that they're people who aren't attracted to leadership because they want to get wealthy or powerful. They're people who are attracted to leadership because they have a vision of where they want the world to go. And it's a vision that, if realized, makes the world a better place for everybody. And to the extent that we can find those kinds of leaders and promote them, then they in turn will, through setting the tone, positively influence the culture, and the culture will improve. And if the culture improves, we're much more likely to be producing people with those kinds of characteristics. So it's an interplay between the two. And sadly, in life, things either spiral down, as I think many of us would agree has happened recently in many places, or they'll spiral up. But it's going to take a few good people finding their way into leadership positions to begin the process of spiraling up. And the other thing I would say is regards that, maybe I don't know if that's a complete answer, but if it isn't, it's because I don't know better. But if the other question about good guys finish last, of course, that's one that we could debate. And I'm sure that we could find people on both sides of the question. And ultimately, you have to pick in life which side of the question you want to be on. and then work hard to make your side of the question the successful side. But I think that's generally speaking, it's not true that good guys finish last. First of all, it depends on what you mean by finish. But I do think that if you just look at a company in a very practical way, companies that actually care about their clients and care about their employees, I believe, are more likely to thrive. And I'm going to avoid imputing any individual company, but it would be very easy for me to, because I know so many companies that if I could escape them, thankfully I'm not an employee, but if I could escape them as a customer, I would be happy to. And then I would be happy to see them disappear because they so clearly don't care about their customers. And personally, I think if we're talking about companies I would rank, whereas I think too many companies in the US anyway, and in other countries, put the shareholders first, and the customers second, and the employees third. I would put the employees first, because if you don't have happy employees and good employees, you won't have happy customers and good customers. And then I would put the customers second, and then I would put the shareholders last, because number one is if the employees and the customers are happy, the shareholders will make money and they should be happy. And secondly, shareholders that have too much influence force companies into short-sightedness, and short-sightedness is the beginning of the demise of a company.
Great insights. A lot of questions coming in, so I'll take a few more questions from our participants. The first one is connected to something that you said, that leaders set the vision, which is great. If the leader has a positive vision, which is beneficial for the employees, for the organization in the long run, that's great. But we have also seen CEOs and public sector leaders whose vision is self-serving. And when you have a leader who is setting a vision that only serves himself or herself, what is the role of other stakeholders? How can they mobilize to stop such a vision? Or what can they do when you are being led by someone who is taking you in the wrong direction? Is there a role for other stakeholders?
Well, there certainly is. And we see numerous examples of that from history. I certainly don't want to foment revolution. There have been many, many cases where the leader has been totally self-serving and is not interested in the welfare of the people. And generally speaking, they come to a bad end. And usually they come to a bad end because some group of people gets together and ensures that happens. If it's a democracy and it's possible, those leaders usually get voted out. If it's not a democracy, I think those leaders usually get expelled in some other fashion, often violent. I'm not espousing revolution, but I'm saying that leaders have to have a vision if they want to be successful, and that vision has to be one that results in the bulk of the people moving into a better place, a better era.
Yes, but when you're being led by a bad leader, what can you as a manager, if your boss is setting the wrong example, you cannot fire your boss clearly.
Okay, we'll limit it to companies and not countries, and that's much better. Yeah, much easier to talk about. Yeah,
that's a difficult place to be in. But while you think on that, I think Chuck says hi to you, and Chuck also has a question which is connected to this, that he's saying that the difference between good and bad leaders, part of it is decision making, and sometimes leaders have to take tough decisions. And in your book, you particularly talk about the timing of firing people. Sometimes you need to let certain people go. If they're not performing, they're not right for the culture. How do you take those tough decisions, and how do you balance the culture? Because you're also setting the culture in the organization. How do you balance balance them? Do you have any advice for young leaders?
Well, there's really two sets of questions there. One of them has to do with firing fundamentally, and the other one has to do with taking positions that aren't popular within your company. So let me start with the firing one. I don't enjoy firing any more than anybody else does. And I would, if I met somebody who enjoyed firing others, I would really question their personality structure. But at the same time, leading often involves asking people to go someplace else. And my belief is that you are ultimately doing them a favor. And not only that, you're doing the rest of the company a favor. So you're doing a favor to one person in the sense that they are obviously out of sync with the company, and they need to find an environment with which they are in sync. And that's one possibility. So by firing them or inviting them to move on, you're doing them a favor, or they're behaving in a way that would be unacceptable anywhere. And by jarring them through a firing, you're giving them an opportunity that they might not otherwise have, because people who are exhibiting bad behavior consistently need to be jarred into changing, and you're giving them an opportunity to change. So I see in both cases, you're doing them a favor, and ultimately you have to worry about the bulk of the people. So if there are 3,000 people and one of them is behaving poorly and jeopardizing the health and well-being of everybody else, I think you'd be wrong not to take them into consideration. In terms of taking positions in a company or in a group or an organization that are unpopular, my belief there is, and I've really written a lot about this in the book, that the best leaders in history have followed this three-step approach that was first described, I think, by Cyrus the Great, the leader of Persia, ancient Persia, 2,500 years ago. Cyrus said, allegedly, anyways, it's chiseled in stone that he said it. He said, diversity in counsel, unity in action. And what that means is, think about it, diversity in counsel means when you're discussing, preparing, leading up to making a decision. And then unity in action is after the decision's been made, everybody's got to be behind it. They have to be unified. And I think most of the leaders in the world have followed that. But here's the important part. The leader is the person in the middle who makes the decision. So the leader, generally, if there's a big decision, calls together a group of relevant people, usually a small group, like 7 or 8, because you can't have a good discussion with more than 7 or 8. They discuss the issue. And there, it's important that A, everybody express their real opinion, and B, that the leader is listening. Because the worst leaders in the world don't listen. They just make decisions in a vacuum. They're dictatorial. They don't care about their advisors. So the advisors have to advise, and honestly, without fear. The leader has to listen and not discourage honesty. And then after the leader makes a decision, then everybody's got to get behind it. But it's often, not often, but sometimes the case that the leader listens to the best advice and the honest opinions of the advisors, the people that report to him, and still makes a decision that is different from what they would have done. But that's why that person's the leader. And it's their obligation to make the best decision that they possibly can. But it's at the same time, it's their obligation to listen to those advisors in order to do the best job they can of making a decision. So it's a very tricky and balanced sort of a dynamic.
Absolutely. And when will you be collaborative? When are you decisive? When there is an emergency, it's a crisis, it's you're better positioned to exercise authority there, because time, there's limited time to take a decision. So depending on.
Let me add one thing to that, and that is that because this is all, it's very, in a sense, it's very simple, and in a sense, it's very complicated. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Jim Mattis, the guy who was Secretary of Defense under Trump for a while, but he couldn't get along with Trump, and Trump couldn't get along with him, I guess. And so he quit.
Yeah. Now
he's at the Hoover Institution at Stanford. But he's best known for being head of the Marine Corps for about, 20, 30 years. And he just wrote a book on leadership recently, and I immediately bought it and read it. And I was so impressed because this will sound a little selfish, because he agreed with me. In his book, he said he always tells his officers what he wants them to accomplish, but he never tells them how. And I thought that's so important. And that's why I had also written something very similar to that. The leader's job is to tell them what to accomplish. But if you tell the people how to accomplish it, first of all, you take away their dignity, you take away their enthusiasm, and you take away their opportunity for creativity. And you probably come up with a worse result, because there's no single leader who's smart enough to figure out how for everything at all. So I think it's really important that leaders delegate within parameters. I like to say, when I was CEO of Silicon Valley Bank, I, in 10 years, really made only about 4 decisions. And they were all big ones, and they were all using that method of discuss, decide, deliver. But for everything else, I pushed every decision down if I could. Every single decision down, and I gave people lots of latitude within parameters. As leader, I was saying, these are the 3 or 4 things we want to accomplish, but how to accomplish it, that's something you push down and let other people decide, or you rob them of their enthusiasm.
Yeah, that's a great insight, Ken. I think delegating to the right people, empowering people, and enabling an environment where people can demonstrate their creativity, because the guiding principle there is people take ownership of things that they help co-create. If they co-create something, they own it.
Exactly.
That's the sort of the central idea in this.
That's exactly right. And if you don't do that, guess what happens? All the really smart and creative people leave and go work for some other place.
Yeah.
And then you end up with uncreative, not smart people.
So I want to build on this. And there's a question from, we have several questions that I need to run through quickly in the next 13 minutes, in the next 12 minutes. So if you could just spend maybe a couple of minutes on each of the questions.
Yeah.
Sean has asked, when you're talking about a team, right, you're delegating, but you need the right people in the team. And for that, you need good recruitment strategies. How do you hire well? And in your experience, what are some of the recruitment strategies that have worked well?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to just say that hiring well is very difficult. And so because it's very difficult, you also got to be pretty good at letting people go well, and don't wait too long. But the obstacles to hiring well are the following. First of all, most of us, when we interview somebody, we subconsciously let them know what we want them to say, and then they say it. And then we think, oh my God, I found the right person. But it's because you're leading the witness. So it's good to take some kind of a course or a seminar in interviewing so that you know how to ask questions that bring out what people really think, as opposed to lead them in a direction that results in their saying what you want to hear. The second thing is you need to hire people that, I say in the book, complement you, not compliment you, because interviewees are often very good at subtly complimenting the interviewer, and the interviewer feels so good about it that they don't realize they're being snowed. And you need some people that complement you, which means if you're good at the big picture, you need a detail person. If you're good at managing people but not at managing projects, you need to make sure that you're hiring people with complementary skill sets. Otherwise, you end up with a bunch of people like yourself, and that's a terrible place to be. You may be wonderful, but you don't want everybody like you. And then, so I'll drop that because I've only got a couple of minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll do another one.
Another question from a young professional, Nafisa. She's asking, hi Ken, in your opinion, how do the best leaders look at or perceive the mistakes or errors made in the organization by the employees?
Yeah. Okay. There are two kinds of mistakes, I think. There are mistakes that are just the result of general sloppiness. And there are mistakes that are mistakes, to be sure, but the person who made the mistake did so in earnest. I don't know if I said that properly. But in any case, they were following good thinking procedures and trying their best. And if somebody makes a mistake that really hurts the company, I think it's the leader's fault, the manager's fault, not the person's fault, because good managers are constantly delegating within parameters. So it suggests that those parameters were too broad. If the mistake has a deleterious effect on the organization, then the manager made a mistake, that they shouldn't have made the parameters that broad. But if the parameters are set right and the person makes an honest mistake, meaning it wasn't sloppiness, it was earnestness, made in earnest, then I think we need to recognize and reward them for the learning experience. Because good organizations are constantly learning, and you can't learn without making mistakes. I always mention to people that when the first big decision I made as CEO lost us about $120 million. And I wasn't being sloppy. In retrospect, I still felt like I was, but I was trying hard. And our board was kind enough and smart enough to say, it was a mistake and let's not do that one again. But we learned so much from this. Mm-hmm. And it actually, believe it or not, the learning was worth more than the $120 million we lost.
Yeah. Can you also comment on the sloppiness part? And what if you have a team member who is repeatedly making sloppy mistakes? What's your advice?
My advice is you take their license away. It's like a pilot. If they start making sloppy mistakes, you got to ground them because they're going to destroy a plane. And if people persist in making sloppy mistakes, you have to give them fair warning and then ask them to go work in some other environment where they're not being given the opportunity to make sloppy mistakes, I think.
Yeah, so you have to be quite strict, or?
I think you have to be strict about sloppy mistakes, yeah. You can allow a couple, but if people don't change their behavior and try harder, you find some other organization for them to go work in, or let them find it, I think. Okay. I don't mean to be harsh, by the way. We're doing this for the sake of everybody else as well.
Yeah. No, I think that's very practical and very relevant.
Yeah.
And I think
another question. We're almost done here with time.
Yes. So we have so I will sort of combine the last couple of questions. They were around cultures. You have leaders. They have relationship with other leaders in organizations. You have a relationship between leaders and the team members. And how do you set the right culture, both for communication across cultures inside the organization? What are some of the best practices in setting the right culture in an organization, in your opinion? And I will combine that with a last question, which is quite different, but you may find it interesting. If Ken were advising President-elect Biden, what would be his top 2 or 3 admonishments regarding leadership in light of the poisoned environment in Washington, D.C., if not globally. So you can have a crack at that, and also
well, these are really hard questions.
Comments on culture.
Yeah.
Culture one is the easy ball. I mean, that's the easy one.
Well, the culture setting one is, I think that nothing is formulaic. Everything is difficult. Everything is sophisticated. But if you tried to reduce it to sort of a formula, you would say that on the cultural side, you have to first of all ask yourself, am I a leader? Am I the kind of person who should be in a leadership position? Am I in it for me, or am I in it for the people? And if you're in it for you, I would suggest that you resign. Then the second thing is you have to build a team around you that is the right kind of a team. But the most important aspect of that team is that they share your values, and that they buy into your vision, and that they too are not there just to get rich or powerful, but because they want to make the world a better place, and they want to make this group of people fulfill their dreams. And then you've got to make sure that people walk the talk.
Yep.
And you and your team are walking the talk. And then you've got to reward good behavior in various ways throughout the organization. And you've got to keep pushing decision-making down so that people feel responsible, because responsible people build a conscience, and they start being governed by their conscience as opposed to orders from above. And that's an oversimplification, but that would be my general formula. As far as Biden goes, I think that that he's got the sort of the biggest challenge, one of the biggest challenges in recent history in front of him, because he's got to figure out how he can make his program, his tent, big enough to fit the majority of the people into it. Because right now we're headed in the direction of being two countries almost. And that's not going to work unless we want to actually be two countries, which I'm not in favor of. So he's got to figure out how he can make the tent big enough that the majority of the people can fit inside, but without making it so loose that there's really no tent anymore. It's just air. And then he's got to figure out, I think, how he's going to develop a productive relationship with China. To me, that's one of his biggest challenges. And then the third big challenge is that he's got to start improving the U.S. instead of criticizing everybody else, because the U.S. is in the situation they're in not because somebody did it to them, but because we have not invested properly in ourselves, in our own country and culture. So those are the three things that I would admonish him to do. And that's it.
Wonderful. I think this has been a very inspiring and insightful session. Ken, thank you so much. For our friends who are watching, I hope you were as inspired as I was being part of this conversation with Ken Wilcox. And to learn more, I encourage you to get a copy of Ken's book, Leading Through Culture. You can order it on Amazon.com, and it's a fantastic book. And I can assure you that Ken is not giving me a commission to promote his book. I think it's a wonderful book, and I think you will all benefit. I also want to invite Sanjeev back. Sanjeev, if you want to share your concluding remarks. Before that, I want to thank the Asia Society and Asia 21 for giving us this opportunity. And particularly Sanjeev and your team, Tenzin, Hee-Chang, Cooper. It's midnight in New York, and I am inspired by your commitment to facilitating this conversation for young leaders from all over Asia. So thank you so much. Sanjeev,
thank you very much, Ejaj. Thank you very much. And thanks to Asia Society for the opportunity. And Sanjeev, we've given you 0 seconds. So
no, I'll take millisecond. No, it was definitely a very insightful conversation, and in the chat box, you could see that comment, insightful comment, insightful conversation, and there were so many nuggets of practical advice. Values matter. Leaders set the tone. How they conduct matter more than what they say. these are all like practical advice. And Ejaj didn't have to buy the book from Amazon. Actually, if you have not filled out the form, please do so right now. It's still on the chat box. Get the book, and a big round of applause to Ken and Ejaj for an insightful conversation. And at 12:30, Hannah Shams Ahmad from class of 2008 is hosting the next session. And that's a very important discussion also. It's on digital security issues in South Asia in the era of a pandemic. So please come back to the session tab and you will see the session that's on digital security issues flashing at 12:30. Please attend that session. And Ejaj, you all make this easy for us. It's late night, but it's okay. We got one more day and we will wrap up after tomorrow, midnight tomorrow. So thank you all and come back again tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.